Right, so we're going to be using Java to interact with this schema. Right, you're going to have to create the schema, which you already should have from the previous assignment. And right now, you've only interacted with using select statements and inserts and updates and views and store procedures and whatnot. But this time around, we're going to interact with it using classes and Java programs, right? So you'll create for each one of the tables, you'll create a data model that will represent the each table. So since there's a website table, there will be a website Java class. Since there is a page table, there will be a page class. And so these will be the in-memory representation of all these records, right, as you read them from the database onto memory. Right? Each one should have constructors that allow you to initialize each one of these classes. We also follow a naming convention on how the project should be named and whatnot. And we also give you some ideas, some examples on how is it that we might connect to these databases. Right? That you can specify the name of the Java driver that connects to a database, the URL strings that points to the schema, and the username and password to log in to the database. Okay, and then we ask you to create DAO. DAOs are data access object. This is a very common best practice to encapsulate all data access, right, in dedicated classes. Right, so instead of you putting a code anywhere that you want to connect to a database. Instead of doing that, you encapsulate in one single place, one single class that is dedicated to the interaction with the database. So all your inserts, all your updates, all your everything, right? Any interaction with the database would be found in a data access object, right? As opposed to spreading it across your entire application. We ask you to implement the following methods, right? And create a developer, find developer by ID, find developer, blah blah blah. So these are going to implement the actual select statements, the inserts, the updates, to the database, and they're going to expose to the rest of the application. That expose a nice API, right, that others can use to actually do the connection and talk to the database. What this allows us to do is to have the rest of the application be independent of the idiosyncrasies of talking to a database, right? So that if tomorrow we want to migrate from a relational database, we want to migrate to a non-relational database, the API would be the same, right? The rest of the application would be insulated from any changes downstream. So data access objects allows us to create these point of integration that makes the rest of the application independent of the data storage strategy. So for each so we ask you to implement several data access objects. Usually you'll have one data access object per table that you're interacting. So there'll be one for widgets, one for pages, one for websites, one for developers, and so on and so forth. Right. So each one will have its own DAO. Right. Next week, when we talk about JPA, we'll see that after having written 3 or 4 of these data access objects, we're going to realize that they all look the same. There's a pattern to these data access objects. That once you've written a couple, you realize that they follow a very defined pattern. Right? So ideally, as good developers, we like to generalize the mechanism. So instead of having to write a new DAO for a new table that we want to interact with, could we generalize that, right? And perhaps provide a mechanism that you give me the parameters of what table you want to talk to, what are the fields, and I can generically talk to any table. So that's exactly what JPA does, and we'll cover JPA next week. Allows you to write DAOs very generically. So we'll cover that next week. But first, at least we need to have suffer through it at least once. And then once we suffer through it, we say, okay, well, we can generalize this, and we don't have to write a DAO ever again. Kind of like learning the multiplication tables once, and then we just use a calculator. So it's the same. We ask you to do the same interaction we did for the previous assignment which you did it manually with select statements and inserts and updates, do the same exact thing, but now do it programmatically. Do it from your Java code, right? Do the same inserts for the same users, the same websites, the same pages, okay, the same widgets, and write DAOs that allow you to update, to delete, to insert, and whatnot. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's the upcoming assignment.